But the
Yeah.
tree of Syriac has many roots, and if you cut one root, the tree will die. But it's that tree that creates us who we are today. But I can't discount any of our past names because that's what makes us who we are. If I'm asked who am I, what's my ethnicity, what's my background, of course I'm going to say who I am, not the country I live in or the country of origin.
Good evening, everybody. After a short technical problem, we are now, I hope, live and you can hear us. So we are here together with our guest, Richard Ghazal, who is the director of IDC in Defense of Christians. Before that, he was a long time he served in the US Army in several positions. He was also in Germany for some years in Ramstein. And he has a very interesting story. Of course, he's a Sirioyo, originally, I would say originally from Midyat. And we are really honored to have you here, Richard. Thank you that you give us your time, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. And I hope that we will speak about some points and start a discourse in our community with this podcast. So honored to be to have you as a guest. Welcome, Richard Ghazal.
Taudi and Raus, it's really a pleasure to be with you. It's an honor. I've been following the work of Kano, the podcast specifically, and I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, and it's my honor to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. And for the audience, please comment, leave some comments in the comment section of YouTube, our YouTube channel, now or even later. If you leave some comments or questions now during the live podcast, we will gather all the questions together. And at the end of the interview, we will ask these questions, Richard. But even after the live session, feel free to leave some questions. I'm pretty sure that Richard will follow the interview and the comments, and we will do the same. And we will give our best to answer all your questions or start a conversation even after the live show in the comment section. And if you still did not subscribe, please hit the subscribe button and hit on the bell so that you stay tuned to upcoming interviews. We will have a lot of interviews in the near future with interesting guests as Richard. So without further ado, let's start. We will cover, I think, a lot of topics today, but we will start maybe with a little bit focus on the U.S. Army, also the time where you served as a U.S. Army. I think in our communities, it's very rare to have somebody in the army, in the U.S. Army or German Army. You don't hear that a lot of times, so it's very interesting, I think, for our audience. And then, of course, we will go to your work at IDC, your work, and of course, IDC in general. And maybe we can focus, I thought, on two topics: the situation of the Syriac, especially, but all Oriental Christians in our home area, Beth Nahrin, and maybe then at the end discuss the situation of our people in the diaspora, because we became a diaspora community. I would say most, like, I don't know, in percentage, we don't have really a census, but I would say the majority of our people live in the diaspora. Especially in Tur Abdin, it's very clear we have around 3,000 Syriac in Tur Abdin, our, let's say, home country. But I live now in Enschede, Netherlands. We have more Syriac here in Enschede alone than in whole Tur Abdin. And this is just an example. I think the same is, you can say that for, let's say, Zudatelia has more Syriac than Qamishli, etc., etc. So we became a diaspora community. And I think this is also true for other parts of our community. If I say, I think you use a lot of times the term Syriac, so we will use this term Syriac today. We as Kano, for us, we accept and respect all the terms. If you say Assyrian, Aramean, Syriac, Chaldean, everything is fine for us. So let's use the term Syriac today. So even if we look at other parts like the Maronites, even they, I think most of the Maronites live outside Lebanon right now. Even they are still a big community in Lebanon, but the biggest portion of the Maronites live outside Lebanon. I would say Brazil is maybe the biggest Maronite community in the world. So was a long part from my side. So Richard, I will give the mic to you. Please tell us a little bit about you as a person, but please also start with your family background. Where did your father came from? Where your mother came from? Maybe how did you end up in USA? Maybe you can start there, and then let's go see where the communication is going.
Certainly. Thank you very much. And once again, thank you. It's great to be with you. My name is Richard Ghazal. I was born in the United States, raised in the United States. And as you mentioned, I served in the United States military. But of course, my history goes back further than my personal history. It goes back quite some time in my family history. My family, as you pointed out, finds its roots in Tor Abdin. My father's family is from the city of Midyat in Tor Abdin, which we consider the capital of Tor Abdin, of course.
Yeah.
My mother's family originally is from both Mardin and Midyat, on her mother's and father's sides, father's side from Mardin and mother from Midyat. My father's family left Tor Abdin around the Seifo. We don't know exactly what year it was. It was probably just before Seifo, 1914, 1912, thereabout. And they settled for about a decade in the city of Adana, which, as you and many of your viewers are maybe familiar, Adana is where our people opened a school and orphanage just after Saifo, which provided care and education to many of our orphans, Syriac orphans, as well as orphans from other churches of the Syriac community. So Chaldean, Assyrian Church of the East, and others were in Adana. So my family, my father's side, my grandfather and his family settled in Adana for about 10 years. And in 1923, they left Adana after the French withdrew from the city of Adana. The reason that Christians were able to find safety in Adana is because the French had control, had mandate over the region. Once the French withdrew in 1923 and the new Turkish state took over in Adana, they and many other Syriacs, for that matter, settled in Beirut. Others settled in the Holy Land, Jerusalem, Bethlehem. Others in Syria, Jordan, Qamishli, Damascus, and other places. In 1972, just at the very end of 1972, in December, my father's family moved to the United States because they sensed the society in Lebanon changing. Through the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, Lebanon was a paradise. It was a Christian. It was a Christian society. Had very Western French Christian influence socially, politically, and so forth. It was the economic capital of the Middle East. They called it the Paris of the Middle East.
Yeah.
But in the early 70s, the demographics began to change. And my father and my grandfather and their family had the foresight to know that things were changing and it may not be good. So in 1972, they made the decision. They came to the United States. My mother's family has a different history, which I find which is a small state. It's the smallest state in the United States. But it was one of the first communities of Syriacs in the Western Hemisphere, not just in the United States. Throughout the 19th century, Rhode Island was a thriving and very vibrant Syriac community. The first Syriac church in the United States was established in Rhode Island, the Church of Mor Ephraim, St. Ephraim, and it still exists to this day. I'm a member of that church, and I'm blessed to be a part of that community. So my mother's family and my father's family have very different historical paths.
Yeah.
But I was born here in the United States, as I mentioned, and they each gave me a very acute or a very keen inclination to be interested in who I am, what my history is. Although I'm born in the United States and in a very American society, that history was always with me. That interest was always a part of me. So I grew up here in Rhode Island. I have three sisters. I'm one of four children, and loving family. And I still find myself around my family to this day. As a young man, I became interested in political science, history, and that sort of thing. So when I graduated high school, I went to college and I studied. I did two majors. I got two bachelor's degrees, one in political science and one in philosophy, because I think both of those studies are very complementary to each other. After I completed university, I got my bachelor's degrees. I joined the United States Air Force. Andras, I'll forgive you. You said Army. That's okay.
Sorry, sorry.
It's okay. It's funny because in the United States, in the military, there's a
Yeah,
big rivalry between Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines.
maybe.
So it's all the same from your perspective. That's okay,
Yeah.
but it's a big deal. I joined the United States Air Force
Yeah.
for a number of reasons, but the primary reason is because my father also served in the United States Air Force. He came to the
Okay.
United States, as I mentioned, he came in 1972. He was a young man, 18, 19 years old, and he completed university. After university, he joined the Air Force. He was an officer. So I
Yeah.
joined as an officer as well, following in his footsteps, but not just because I was following his footsteps, although he made it certainly an interest of mine, but because I wanted to serve not just my country, the United States, but I wanted to do something for my people. As you mentioned in your introduction, Andraus, not too many of our people in the United States military, or probably many militaries of their host countries in Europe and
Yeah.
otherwise. So I thought it would be a good thing for me to do, broaden my vision, my perspective, but also do something for my nation and my people. I served in the United States Air Force as an intelligence officer for a number of years. And then after several years, I was selected for a program where the Air Force sent me to law school. So I went to law school, I became a lawyer, and then I switched over to what they call the JAG Corps in the United States military, the Judge Advocate General Corps. I retired from the Air Force in 2001. And in 2001, that's when I also joined the organization In Defense of Christians, which I was an active member, a volunteer of In Defense of Christians for many years before that. But it is upon my retirement that I took over as a full-time executive director of the organization. So it's been a very interesting ride thus far. I'm 41 years old, but it's been a very interesting and exciting ride. And I look forward to where the Lord takes me next.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I've maybe 2 points on your CV, let's say. First point about the Adana orphanage. I read about it in the book from Abu Zaitun about Naum Fayek. And I
Yes.
didn't know, but I think Bishop Dolabani was the founder of this orphanage, which is very interesting. And the Syriac from Rhode Island at that time, they were the main sponsor of this orphanage.
So
So it's very
yeah,
interesting. Your
it's
father
a
was in your father's side, they were in Adana. Your mother's side were at that time in Rhode Island, and they were the main sponsor. Not the family directly alone, but the Syriac community in New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island. They were the main sponsor, so that
yeah,
Hasud al-Abani was able to start the
yeah,
orphanage. At
yeah. I'm
least
glad you brought that up
according
because
to what Naam Fayek wrote at that time.
I'm so happy you brought that up because the Adana orphanage is one of my most it's the most interesting to me episodes in our modern history because we're able to take such tragedy of the Seifo and do something so beneficial for our people that didn't just benefit the orphans of that day 100 years ago, over 100 years ago, but we're even reaping the benefits to this day of what the orphanage produced.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, Hasio Yohanan Dolabani was one of the primary teachers. He was a Syriac teacher and the spiritual head of that orphanage. It was founded by a gentleman who served. Interesting story. His name is Hanna Harun. He served in the Ottoman army as a
Yeah.
conscript. He was just drafted and taken to the Ottoman army. Uh, just before establishing the orphanage, he defected from the Ottoman army, which means he just left. He ran away illegally, and he joined the French army, and he was sent to Adana to serve in Adana because the French were there. And it was
Yeah.
him, the French officer Hanna Haroun, who talked to the French government, the French High
Yeah.
Commissioner, and said, "Please, we need your sponsorship. We need money. We have orphans. Establish this orphanage." So it
Yeah.
was Hanna Haroun, it was Aziz Chaliko, it
Yeah.
was Yohanan Dolabani, it was Paul John. It was these gentlemen in Adana who were visionaries, who thought ahead, who thought bigger than themselves to put together this orphanage, this project. And to this day, we're reaping benefits because they weren't just orphans. They turned into some of the greatest figures of the Syriac national renaissance of the 20th century. We're
Yeah.
talking about Gabriel Asad, musician. We're
Yeah.
talking about Yohanan Salman, author, thinker, writer, philosopher. We're talking about Falos Gabriel, educator. We're talking about Yeshua Samuel, Bishop of the United States
Yeah.
for several decades.
Yeah.
So it was a huge period in our history, and it should not go ignored.
If I'm not mistaken, there was also one of the students of this orphanage who at the end lived in Brazil, and he was the one who brought, let's say, the first priest to Brazil, and
Yeah.
he opened a magazine or something in Brazil. I
So
forgot his name, but there was also
his name escapes me at the moment.
Eli or something.
Abraham,
Maybe
Gabriel Soma, Abraham Soma. It's
I'm
it's
not sure. I'm not sure,
he has three names. Those are his names.
yeah,
But
it seems like they were so deep rooted in
yeah,
our culture, and let's say they were real patriots, so that
yeah.
even wherever they went, they started something. And even in
Their
Brazil, which
perspective
is very
was
far away, and we nowadays we think, okay, it's very easy to give a call to the patriarch and say, "Hey, we need
yeah,
a priest." But
yeah,
100 years ago, it was very
yeah,
complicated, yeah,
yeah,
to organize that. So we forget that, but it's really, you're right. They turned the misery to something beautiful.
yeah.
And you said in 2021 you finished you stopped serving the U.S. Air Force. Sorry,
Right.
not Army, the U.S. Air Force. Yeah, and then you started at the IDC, right?
That's
Um,
correct. Yes, 2021. I started at IDC. I came on board as the executive director.
yeah,
Um, pardon me. IDC is an organization that, for a long time, uh, grabbed my interest. I was a volunteer for many years before that. Excuse me. IDC was founded in 2014 during the ISIS genocide.
yeah,
In 2014, ISIS was all over the news. It was all over the headlines in the United States, in Europe, all over the world. But unfortunately, although the media was covering it, the government was silent, particularly the United States government, but most Western governments were silent, although it
yeah,
was all over the media. IDC was put together initially as a response to this silence. It was in 2014 when a group of friends, Americans, I should say, who
yeah,
came together, who were concerned for their fellow Christians in the Middle East. And it started off not as an organization, it started as a movement.
yeah,
In 2014, they put together the first conference, which was a big summit in Washington, D.C. They invited members of Congress, members of the administration. At the time, it was the Obama administration, State Department, media, foreign leaders, foreign ministers, government ministers, to come together to discuss the issue and say action is needed. The initial response to the IDC summit was not just positive, but it was very effective. And it was in 2014, after that initial summit, where the United States government started to take it seriously, and they officially designated the ISIS genocide as an official genocide. And it was after that genocide recognition that aid and not only military action against ISIS was able to happen, but also
yeah.
humanitarian aid was able to be provided to the victims and survivors of the ISIS genocide. It was after that initial summit in 2014 when it was organized and established as an organization, not just as a movement. So again, I'm blessed to be part of the organization, and I'm humbled to be part of the organization to be able to do this work for Christians internationally.
Actually, I heard about the IDC through, let's say, your person, because you are publishing a lot on social media, etc. I didn't know IDC before, or to be honest, but it's very interesting organization, and we as Kano, or me personally, I'm very thankful that there's something like the IDC, and I hope God will bless your work, and you will continue supporting not only our people, the Syriac, but all minorities in the Middle East, or even I think in North Africa, where you have your focus also. Could you explain what is the goal of IDC? It's not humanitarian work. I think it's more, let's say, lobby work for the interests of the minorities in the Middle East. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, you're very close to what we do. So after the initial ISIS thing that I just discussed, in the first Trump administration, ISIS was basically defeated. It didn't go away. ISIS is still there today, but what we call the territorial defeat of ISIS. So they didn't hold land, they didn't hold territory at all. This is like 2017, 2018, thereabout.
Yeah.
After the territorial defeat of ISIS, IDC still had lots of work to do. Although ISIS was not an immediate threat, IDC opened its focus to look at Christians in Egypt, the Copts, to look at Christians throughout, of course, Iraq and Syria, also Turkey, the Holy Land, Iran, and even Nigeria, which is not part of the
Yeah.
Middle East, but Nigeria is a huge, huge hotspot of Christian persecution. So this is what we do: we operate along three prongs basically. So one is media engagement, right? So putting the word out there in the media, educating the public, and that sort of thing. The next is actual education and proliferation of information, let's say, for a Western audience, as well as for lawmakers, members of the U.S. government. The third one, of course, as you mentioned, is lobbying. So policy,
Yeah.
lobbying, advocacy, and that sort of thing. So we operate along those three avenues, three prongs to do our work, and that's what we're doing today. Thank God.
Great. Can you give us some, let's say, highlights of your work at IDC? Something which every Syrio, every Syriac people should know about.
Sure. Yeah. So we know genocide recognition, the ISIS genocide, was a big success of IDC early on. The genocide, what we call in the United States, the Armenian genocide, which was really the Armene, Greek, Syriac, Assyrian, Chaldean, the greater, the Aramean genocide, went unrecognized by the U.S. government for over 100 years. It was recently, just over the last few years, where IDC, along with a big coalition of partner organizations in the United States, were able to change this. In 2019, the United States Congress, both the House of Representatives as well as the Senate, officially recognized the genocide of Christians under the Ottoman Empire, the Armenians, Syriacs, Greeks, Assyrians, and so forth. This was in 2019. But even so, even though the U.S. Congress recognized it, the White House did not recognize it, which was a problem because until the White House recognized it, the U.S. government still did not officially recognize it. Although one branch of the U.S. government did, but it
Mhm.
wasn't until 2021. In fact, on April 24th, which is Armenian Genocide
Yeah.
Remembrance Day, where President Joe Biden, former President Biden, recognized the genocide of Christians in the Ottoman Empire, which officially granted recognition to the genocide which our grandparents and great grandparents were victims and survivors of. The official name is the Armenian Genocide, as far as the U.S. government is concerned. But in the legislation that IDC worked on, in the legislation, we made sure we made a point, a priority, to
Yeah.
include names of all Christian groups that were affected by this, which includes Syriacs, Assyrians, Aramaeans, and Chaldeans. So this is a great success of ours. Just last year in 2023, excuse me, in 2024, pardon me,
No problem.
IDC worked with the U.S. Congress to pass legislation to hold accountable proxy terrorist organizations of Iran throughout the Middle East. So Iranian proxy organizations in Iraq that are holding the Nunwa plane hostage to this day, those in Syria, those in Lebanon, Hezbollah specifically, and those operating in the West even.
Okay. Do you also work with the pardon me, the organizations of the Christians, the Syriac, Syrian, etc. organizations in the homeland? Do you have active coalition with them, active work with them? How does
We
it work?
do.
Yeah,
We do. Yes, we do. In fact, we host many uh, partner organizations in the United States. When folks come from the Middle East, whether it's from Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, to the United States for a number of reasons, whether it's just a visit or whether it's for a
yeah,
conference or a summit, we make sure to bring them with us in our advocacy, in our lobbying. In Washington, in Congress, and in the White House and State Department. Just recently, we joined with the Patriarch Ephraim II in Washington D.C., where he spoke at a worldwide summit, the International Religious Freedom Summit,
mhm,
and he actually had the chance to meet with many high officials at the U.S. State Department and in Congress to share his message. But he's not the only one. We've hosted many political figures from Iraq, from our people, from the
mhm,
KRG region, from the Iraq central government, who are members of parliament.
yeah,
They're not. Of course, they belong to parties, Syriac parties, whether it's
yeah,
from the north or from KRG regions. They belong to Syriac, Assyrian Chaldean parties. We hosted them here to share their message as well. So one
uh,
thing IDC has always tried to do, I should say, is we try to stay above politics. We try to focus on a lot like what Kano does. We try to stay above politics, above the name issue, because it's these issues that I feel divide us and have
yeah.
always divided us, for many decades. And now in the diaspora, my perspective is, if you call yourself Syriac, Assyrian, Chaldean, Aramean, Christian, Middle Eastern Christian, Oriental Christian, I'm here for you. I'm here to advocate with you and to help you share your message.
That's a great point. I totally agree. It, this question of the name doesn't bring us any further. Yeah, we
No,
had this discussion started, I don't know, 70, 80, 90 years ago, and
yeah.
it didn't help us at all, and it will not bring us any further. So I think it's from my perspective, it's a fact that we have these different names, and the names will stay.
My
Yeah, the
personal
names would
perspective,
stay. So
yeah,
we think as Kano, let's say, we think, let's keep this name issue for later.
yeah,
Yeah, uh, we have we have to distinguish what is important and what is urgent. The name issue is 100% important, but is it really urgent? The past has shown it's not urgent. We still didn't solve it, but we still live. So let's
yeah,
concentrate what is urgent and important, like preserving our language or helping our people in the homeland or organizing ourselves in the diaspora,
yeah,
etc., etc., etc. A lot of things which are urgent and important. Let's
yeah,
concentrate on these points, and of course, the name issue is important, and everybody who is discussing that, it's fine, but it shouldn't be a hurdle. It shouldn't be in our way of working together. It
yeah,
shouldn't. And always, if we have, I don't know, our different organizations, if they have meetings with each other. Let's say best example was the Mor Gabriel issue in
yeah,
2009,
yeah,
2008, 2009, where they were forced to work together. Or even, let's say in Iraq, after the invasion, the organization were forced, because from outside force they were forced to at least to have meetings together. If they,
yeah,
the first thing they say, let's solve the name issue, and then we will do the next step. It
Yeah.
never worked. Never worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
Put the most difficult issue on the table, solve it, and then we will work. It's not working.
Yeah.
Let's keep it for later. Yeah. Let's
I
accept each
absolutely
other
agree.
as we are. If you say Syriac, and I grew up, let's say I grew up really, it's not, let's say I grew up as Aramean, using always the term Aramean, always.
Mhm. Yeah.
But if you say Syriac, I understand Aramean. Even if you would say Chaldean, for me, it's Aramean. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't mind. I think we have to learn that. And at Kano, we say everybody can say whatever he wants.
Yeah.
It is important that in our mind we include the others as well. That's
Yeah.
important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. I agree with you 100%. My personal preference for the word Syriac is only it's not at the exclusion of the other names. My preference for the word Syriac is only because in our language, Suryoyo, Suraya, it's the common denominator. But one thing I really like is I recently saw an old interview from several years ago between Yosef Betluro, and if you recognize the name of a gentleman, his name is Denho Ghatas Maqdisi Ilyas. He was
Yeah.
also a student of the orphanage in Adana, by the way.
Yeah.
He was a great poet. He shared his perspective on the name issue, which really I love, and it resonates with me very strongly. His perspective is all of our the past kingdoms and nations and peoples that we come from, all the names are the roots of our tree. We are the tree of Suryoyutho, but the
Yeah.
tree of Suryoyutho has many roots. And if you cut one root, the tree will die. But it's that tree that creates us who we are today. But I can't discount any of our past names because that's what makes us who we are. So I find that perspective very important, very unifying and inclusive. So that's what I hope to build on.
I agree, and sometimes I think even if I would not agree, even if you would say we are different people, yeah,
Yeah,
different, we are not from run to, even if you would say that just for the sake of argument, it
yeah,
would be smart to work together.
of course,
Even,
of
yeah, it
course,
would be smart, even if we Syrian Orthodox, and the Assyrian and the members of the Assyrian Church of the East, even if we are totally distinct nations, it would be smart to work together because we are
absolutely.
stuck in the same situation. We have the same destiny if we don't work together. So even if we are not one, it would be smart to unify. Yeah. So sometimes I really don't get the urgency of talking about this issue because the urgency is elsewhere. That's
Yeah,
my perspective. The urgency is
I,
elsewhere. We have to organize ourselves. We have to be organized in the diaspora, and we have
mhm,
to support our people in the homeland. We have to preserve our language. We have to not only preserve, we have to develop and establish much more. We have to develop our
yeah,
language skills. Like, I think pretty good Syriac. I know it, but do I know it as I know German
mhm,
because I grew up in Germany? No, I don't.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Even English. English is my third language. I would say at least in written form, my English is much better than my Syriac.
mhm,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
and and even I was a student in a monastery for 2.5 years. Even
mhm,
then, I would still say English, which is my third language,
yeah,
is much better in written
mhm,
form than Syriac.
yeah. One thing I'm very thankful for are TVs, Suroyo TV,
Yeah,
Suryoyo Sat, Assyria TV, all the TVs. Because when you go to various places in Europe, various parts of the United States, people speak Syriac just a little bit differently. If they come from
yeah,
Qamishlik, if they come from Tor Abdin, if they come from Beirut, they'll put different words in, loan words, maybe
yeah,
Turkish loan words, Kurdish, Arabic loan words. Suroyo TV and Suryoyo Sad and all of our TV,
yeah.
they've standardized it. So people ask me, where did I learn Syriac? Before the age of 18, I didn't speak Syriac besides Shlomo and Todi and Barachmor before the
Okay.
age of 18.
Yeah,
Once I became 18, I threw myself, fiercely into learning Syriac. But where did I learn from? I learned from three main places. One is family, um, father, grandparents. That provided the basis, the
Yeah.
foundation. But their Syriac is not developed in the sense that they use a lot of Arabic loanwords, which is fine. I mean, that's
Yeah,
how
klar.
their
For
language is
sure.
preserved. But
Yeah.
where I really learned to develop my language, my Syriac, was from music, Syriac music,
Yeah.
and Syriac television. It's these two places for me. I mean, this is my personal story that served me the biggest, or served me the most in learning Syriac, and for that I'm eternally grateful and indebted to our musicians, our singers,
Yeah.
Habib Musa, Nini Blahdo, these guys, the old school guys.
Yeah.
We'll get into that discussion later. How the old school is better. No, that's just my personal. That's controversial.
It's
But
fine.
also to TV.
Controversial is good.
Yes. Also the TV.
Yeah.
So for this is very important. But you were mentioning before, I want to just go back about the identity issue, the name issue. I find that the name issue is a big issue in Europe, in Sweden, Germany, Netherlands. In the United States, that the name issue, Syriac, Assyrian, Aramean, is not really a very controversial issue as it is in Europe. Here in the United States, we have a slightly different issue with regard to identity, and that is the inclination or the willingness to call yourself Syriac, or whatever your
Yeah.
chosen nomenclature is, versus the country from which your parents come.
Ah,
For
okay.
example, we have many Syriacs in the United States who, if asked by an American or at school, at work, what are you, they would say Iraqi, Lebanese, Jordanian, Turkish. This is a problem. This is a big problem. I don't think you have this problem quite as much in Europe, but we do in the United States. So for me, it's now. Of course, we can't deny where our family comes from. My family was 50 years in Lebanon, from 1922 to 1972. 50 years in Lebanon. So my father was raised in Lebanon. He became a man in Lebanon. He was educated in Lebanon. Lebanon served us. It protected us. It gave us freedom of religion and opportunity. And for that, we're eternally grateful. But that doesn't change who we are. Because here, my family has been in the United States, my father's side for 52 years now, my
Yeah.
mother's side for over 100 years. When asked, my citizenship, the country of my birth, the country where I served, of course, I'm American. But if I'm asked, who am I? What's my ethnicity? What's my background? Of course, I'm going to say who I am, not the country I live in or the country of origin. So for me, it's a very important distinction of ethnic background, whether it's national background or country of citizenship. In the United States, that's a big deal. One thing that our church and our social organizations have been doing a very good job of here in the United States is using the word Suryoyo quite frequently.
Yeah.
Suryoyo Youth, Suryoyo Women's Group, Suryoyo Camp. There's a Suryoyo Camp in New Jersey, and things of that sort. Suryoyo
Mm.
Family Gathering, which is great. It's better than using the name of the country of where your parents come from.
Yeah.
But for me, it's important to find a name that translates into a Western language. Because when I go to school, when I go to work, a young 12-year-old boy, 12-year-old girl is not going to say, if they say, well, what are you? Who are you? They're not going to say Suryoyo, right? They feel embarrassed. They feel shy. So we need to come up with some kind of name for them to say that can correctly and accurately identify and reflect who they are. But that's as you said, that's a
Yeah.
discussion from another day. But that's just to give you an idea. That's the challenge facing us in the United States
Yeah.
versus the challenge that you're experiencing in Europe.
I agree, but actually we see that also in Europe, that
Mm,
especially from Syriac people from Arab speaking countries, let's say,
yeah.
that they sometimes identify with the country they're from, like Syria, Iraq, Lebanon. We don't have, I don't know actually a lot of people coming from Palestine or so-called Palestine. Yeah, it's officially it's Israel
Yeah.
or Palestine region. We don't have that many from that area, but Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, you see sometimes that they identify as Syrians or as Lebanese, etc. We have that
Mhm.
also here, but maybe not at the extent as you have, because like majority of Syriac people here in Europe are from Tur Abdin, and the Syriac from Tur Abdin, they don't identify as Turks. You
Yeah,
don't see that. Very rarely you see somebody identifying himself as Turk.
yeah,
Maybe some who were like for more than 100 years in Istanbul or something, but you don't see that a lot.
yeah,
This is more a phenomena in the Arab speaking countries.
yeah.
Yeah, this is at least my observation.
I don't find I don't judge people. I don't
No,
find any moral I don't cast moral judgment on those who do this. For me, it's a question of what's best for us, what's accurate for us, what's an accurate representation of history, and also let's not forget those of our people who come from Arab countries were treated a little bit better in many cases, not all cases, but those in Lebanon, those in Syria, those in Iraq, they were able to maintain their faith. They were able to maintain dignity and their safety and security for the most part. So there's that dimension also to understand. One thing, as executive director of In Defense of Christians, I've sort of made it an unofficial policy that we will not say, like, if we're talking to members of Congress, lawmakers, policymakers, we will not say uh, Iraqi Christian,
yeah,
Turkish Christian. Um, we will not say that because these Christians in Iraq existed before Iraq itself existed.
of
So how can
course.
you say Iraqi Christians? They were there
For
before
the,
Iraq was a state. So it's the unofficial policy that I've kind of been using for IDC is we say the Christians of Iraq, the Christians of Syria, the Christians of Turkey, rather than Turkish Christians or Iraqi Christians, because that's just an inaccurate reflection of who they are.
for sure, I would say that in most cases, or maybe in all cases, the Christians are the indigenous people of that region.
Yes.
The
Yes.
Christians were there. We call them Christians
Yep.
because of lack of better term. Yeah,
Hmm.
if we were unified under one national term, we would use that term. But
Yep.
they're the original people of that region. They were there before the Arabs, before the Ottomans, before the Kurdish people. Maybe the
Yep.
Persians were more or less the similar period of
Hmm.
time there, but all the other nations or most of the other people living there today, they came later.
Yep.
They
And
came
more
later. So we
importantly,
are the indigenous people there,
yeah, we
and
are the
it's
indigenous
very
people.
important. To be Christian is not the only attribute which
Yep.
distinct us from the others. We
Yep.
are people by we are separate people. That's it.
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
our own
We're
culture,
there.
our own language, our own history,
Yep.
um, and the rich history actually.
Yes. Oh, very rich history. Very rich
Yeah.
history. So this has been my approach for dealing with it. And whenever we meet with members of Congress in the Senate or the House of Representatives, we always give this talk you just provided about we are the indigenous Christians of the Middle East. We have a history of art, culture, religion, of course. We
Yeah.
provided arts and sciences to the Middle East. We built the hospitals. We established. It's a different society completely, unrecognizable. In fact, it would be a disaster if you take Christians out of that society. It would be homogenous. Society without any diversity, and any society that has no diversity is more prone and inclined to become radical. And this is the big point for the U.S. government to understand.
It's a very good point. Let's come back to your work at IDC. Your background as a Syriac, uh, how does that influence your work at the IDC? Uh,
Well, it influences my work in one way, but in another from another perspective, it should not influence my work also because
for
as
sure.
IDC, we are in defense of Christians. That is any Christian that finds itself in danger and in threat. That's Christians, Armenian Christians, Coptic Christians, Syriac Christians, of course, including Assyrian and Chaldean Christians, Christians of all backgrounds. So but what being Syriac and having Syriac background does provide me is insight and perspective and unique understanding that most probably would not be able to understand apart from academic study. For me, it's of course I studied academically, but for me, I have a more intuitive and more organic understanding of the situation that they face themselves in today. And so I hope I can bring that richness to my work, because that's really, I think that's what separates me from most others in this work.
Yeah. There's a saying in English. It says, "Give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime."
That's correct.
And why do I say this saying? Um, if IDC, for example, advocate for the Christians in the Middle East and Africa, let's say, um, in media, in policy, etc., as you mentioned before, it's I would say it's like give a man a fish to feed him for a day. Isn't it
Mhm.
the next step to say, okay, let's, because this communities, Christian communities, especially in the diaspora, if they would be organized in a good manner, and very obviously they are not able to organize themselves for the last 100 years in diaspora, maybe it would be a great idea for an organization like IDC to say, okay, let's organize them, and they will be the mutual people to advocate for the brothers and sisters in the homelands. So the IDC would generate a partner for lifetime, a very strong partner, I would say. The Syriac, let's stay at the Syriac people for now. Not that I want, I respect all the others, of course, the Copts, etc., but because I think most of our audience will be Syriac, let's concentrate on the Syriac.
Yep.
If there would be an entity like IDC, for example, to organize the diaspora to be really a strong diaspora, good organized, like uh, diaspora government, let's say. If we could do something like that, and I think there were like 100 attempts in the last 100 years of just there are a lot of attempts. I hear about them, but it's very obvious. It's very difficult to do. Would that be an idea for IDC to do? Because you would create the best partner for your work.
I think you cut off there. I think
Okay,
you're back. Can you hear me?
I hear you. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you loud and clear. You cut for a quick moment. I think that's a
Okay.
wonderful question, Andros.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's something we are in fact working on now. For a long time, we've been wanting to multiply our work, not just do the work that's required, but multiply it for years to come. As you mentioned, give a man a fish, he eats today. Give a man a fish, teach a man how to fish, and he'll eat for a lifetime. Um, in recent days, months, years, I have been working to do exactly as you've described. In fact, most recently, I've been working closely with His Eminence Archbishop John Kawak here in the United States to begin some sort of advocacy capacity for our people here in the United States. With the blessing of His Holiness Patriarch Ephraim II, we are doing just that. We're at the very early stages. We're discussing, we're planning, but it is something that we do have intentions to work on even greater as time goes on. One thing I want to point out, however, is in order to do such a thing successfully, it's essential for our people to plan ahead of time and think in the future in terms of how they educate themselves, how they see their role in American society, how they see their role in Syriac society, and then move forward from there. Because, as you mentioned, we've been in the United States now for in the diaspora for about 100 years, just over 100 years, and we basically are in the same position that we were in 100 years ago. Um, we are maybe have more money. Um, we have bigger houses, nicer cars, but that doesn't really change the situation that we're in as a people, particularly what it means for where we're headed uh, tomorrow and whether we will survive to see tomorrow or 100 years from now. In order to survive and thrive and grow in the diaspora, we need a few things. One, as we mentioned before, is to have a strong sense of identity. Leaving the name issue aside, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
it's important, but it's not urgent. But having a strong sense of identity as understanding who we are, not necessarily by name, but what our history is, what we've accomplished, who our forefathers were, what we've provided to world civilization, arts and sciences, and these things. Having confidence in who we are, because I find that our people, in often cases, not all, have like an inferiority complex. If you're familiar with this term, an
Yeah.
inferiority complex, we look at ourselves self-consciously, or to be less than our neighbors in the United States or in the diaspora. This is a problem. We need to have more confidence in who we are, so we can say strongly, "This is who I am. I'm not Iraqi. I'm not Jordanian. I'm not Palestinian, Lebanese. This is who I am." The name, again, that's for another day. But in addition to identity, we must be intentional, right? So intentionality.
Yeah.
And what I mean by intentionality is this: for centuries, right, for at least for 1500 years, we've been the victim of history. We've been caught between empires. We've been caught between enemies. We've been caught between Arabs and Israelis, Sunni and Shia, Turk and Kurd, and we are always in the middle. So we never wrote our own history. We were just the victim of history. So now in the West, in the diaspora, in Europe and in the United States, we are now in a position to be intentional with our history, right? Not to just take life as it comes to us, not to take history as it comes to us. It's to think ahead and plan with some forethought. That's one thing. Now, the counterbalance to that is to be reflective, right? To be intentional is to look forward with intention. To be reflective is to look behind us and closely examine and think about and conduct analysis of what we've seen, what we've been through. Because for 100 years, we've been talking about Seifel, and it's very important that we continue to talk about Seifel. But now that the dust has settled and we've had a chance to breathe and take a deep breath, we need to ask ourselves the hard questions. What were the decision points? What were the mistakes? What were the victories, the successes, the failures, and what were the lessons learned going forward, right? So it's being intentional and being reflective, and I think that's important. So back to your initial point about putting together some sort of an advocacy lobby for the Syriacs in the United States and in the West. It's very doable. It's a goal. It's an important thing to really prioritize. But essential would be to have these three things: the strong sense of identity and self-confidence as a community, that confidence, and to be intentional and to be reflective. And with those three things, I have no doubt that our people will be successful, because when we look at our forefathers and all that they were able to accomplish, there's no reason to think otherwise.
Thank you very much for what you just said, and I agree totally. I always say we are always reacting, but we are not acting. We are not proactive. Yeah,
Yes.
I think that's what you mean with intentionally.
Yeah.
And we can learn not only from Seifo, which is 110 years ago already, but also from what happens right now in Syria, or what happened in the invasion of Iraq in 2003, let's say,
Yeah.
um, which, if we were prepared, sorry, I think the camera is back. Okay, now I
There you
think
are.
you can see me again. Yeah, perfect. If we were prepared in 2003, before the US went into Iraq, if we would be prepared, how would be the outcome? Much better than today. If we would be prepared for the Arab Spring in Syria, and it was foreseeable, yeah, you could see this will come to Syria. And the Arab Spring started in 2008. In 2011, it started in Syria. So we had 3 years preparation time, we as a nation, but we
Yeah.
didn't use it because we are always reacting on what's happening. So if
Yeah.
we were organized better organized. Of course, we are organized. It's not like we have no organizations, and it's not like they are doing nothing. They are doing a lot of things, and thanks to all of them, and huge respect to all of them. But it's very obvious it's not enough, and I'm pretty sure we could do much more if we would be, if a bigger part of our people would be supporting that. So if we would be prepared for the Arab Spring in Syria, let's say, we would have a much better outcome than today, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you mean, and we have to learn from our history and be
Yeah.
prepared, because there will always come something.
Yeah.
Let's say, for example, right now, just the in Syria in 8th December, the HTS took over, right?
Yeah.
If we are prepared, we can maybe use this situation for the good. The same
Mhm.
like in Lebanon, Hezbollah is more or less not defeated, but it's much weaker
Mhm.
than the last 30 years, because the unofficial power of Lebanon was the last 30 years was Hezbollah. They were
Yeah.
like they were like government in government. The official government could do nothing
Yeah.
without Hezbollah. So maybe right now it's a historical chance to change that again. Yeah.
Yeah.
But are we, as our community, yeah, are we prepared? Or are we right now saying, oh, there's maybe a chance, let's do something? I think that's what you mean. Be intentional. But to be intentional,
Yeah.
I think you need a strong organization, uh,
Yeah.
which has also the means to do, not only think strategically to the future, but also have the means to do what is necessary.
Yeah. And I think a great example you pointed out earlier in the conversation was the example of Taumim Simkat in the
Yeah.
orphanage in Adana. The organization here in the United States, New Jersey, Boston, Rhode Island, that supported the orphanage. And as you said today, our people in Syria, our people in Iraq, they don't have the capacity to really um, to serve themselves, whether it's financially, humanitarian interests, or even politically. So they're relying on us here in the West, Europe and the United States, to stand for them, to speak for them, to provide some kind of political or financial cover for them. And so it's incumbent upon us. It's our responsibility to do so, because if we don't, who will? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Their numbers in Syria are far lower than they've ever been, even far lower than they were 10 years ago. So they're waiting for us. They're waiting for us. And I'm happy to report. I'm proud to report in recent months, and probably about a year now. In fact, over a year now, the Eastern Archdiocese of the Syriac Church. We're talking church here,
Yeah.
not a secular organization. Has put together an organization, a humanitarian organization, to help our brothers and sisters in Syria who are suffering in recent years. They've helped them financially and otherwise, and this model needs to be looked at and examined, and improved upon, even, so that we can increase our capacity and increase our capability to do such things. So it's very important.
Yeah, for sure. As I said, we have a lot of organizations who are
Yeah.
doing a lot of good things. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it would be too much to list them right now. And
Yeah.
I think I'm very thankful for all of them.
Yeah.
But as I said, I think it would be great if we could organize ourselves in a much better way, or much more organized, much more
Yeah.
structured, and bigger, at least bigger, as big as possible, because I would say we as individuals are very successful. I think
Hmm.
in general, wherever we are pretty successful
Yeah.
individually, but as a community, we are very weak.
Yeah. I
We are
agree with
very
this.
weak. We are
Yeah.
very unsuccessful. As a
Yeah.
community, we are not successful. But on an individual level, we are very successful. And
Yeah.
we have to change that. We have to be also,
Yeah.
as a community, very successful, and we have to be seen. We have to have a voice, etc. And this
Yeah.
is difficult if we stay like as we are today.
Yeah. A great point you bring up there is the fact that we have individual success, but collectively, we haven't had just as much success. And before, when I was talking about being intentional and being reflective, when I say reflective, I mean a very large number of things. One of which is examining what the effect of Seifo was on us, right? When you say we're collectively as a community not as successful and effective, you must ask ourselves. We must ask ourselves how much of that was because of this phenomenon of the psychology of persecution or psychological homelessness, right? Because psychological homelessness is a very real thing for a stateless community, and the psychology of persecution will affect people not just immediately after that one generation after the persecution, the immediate survivors, but even children, grandchildren, great grandchildren learn the lessons of these people who were survivors and scarred by persecution. And so you have to ask yourself how much of that contributes to our, yes, individual success, but our collective shortcoming. Um, Something that needs to be analyzed. This is part of that reflective necessity to be reflective.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Um, I have some more questions. I hope you still have time for us. I just
Absolutely,
looked
absolutely.
at the clock. We are already talking an hour. The time is flying by. Unbelievable. It's very interesting, and I hope we can have another interview in later. Maybe the next
Nadal,
time in Suryoyo.
I hope so, God willingly,
Uh,
God willing.
uh,
But before we go to questions, and I
yeah,
just want to
sure.
speak for a quick moment about Syria. We
Yeah,
we did talk about Syria in this conversation, but I want to talk about the current situation in Syria that's been unfolding over the last few months, specifically affecting Christians. Since the fall of the Assad regime in December 8th, 2024, um, many of our people were overcome with joy, and for good reason, and many of our people were um, very scared, also
yeah,
with good reason. Under the Assad regime, we were persecuted, you could say, as an ethnic community, as a linguistic community. And now, under this new regime, the Islamist regime of HTS and Jolani, we are persecuted and will be persecuted more intensely as time goes on as a faith community, as Christians. And this is yet another manifestation of the fact that we're always caught in the middle, right? So it was after the Ottoman Empire, after the Saifo, that Islamist nationalism started to rise, and so Christians and many others introduced secular Arabism to keep
mm,
Islamism under wraps. But of course, that became more out of control and more radical than initially expected. With the fall of the Assad regime, um, he committed very many sins against us, the Arabist governments, right? They squashed the Syriac Renaissance and
yeah,
in the mid 20th century, and now we're facing something very different and arguably more intense on the horizon. Because this HTS group who took over the transitional government in Syria, they're not what the Western media portrays them to be. In the Western media, oftentimes you'll see them as the saviors. They overthrew Bashar al-Assad, which is true. But what they're capable of and what they do have in their plans, given their religious and ideological foundation, is very frightening. In the last couple of weeks, we saw a mass slaughter, a massacre of Alawites as well as Christians
mm,
in Syria. And this is just a sneak peek. This is just the beginning, because once they solidify power, once they gain the trust of the West by talking sweet words and political gesturing, as they secure their reputation, it's going to become more intense. And once they're done with the Alawites, they're going to look toward the Christians.
for
And this is
sure.
something that we need to be ready for. So I just want to be sure to make that point very clear, because it's important that people understand this.
That's a very good point. And I read actually today that I think the Western countries um, have decided to give more than 5 billion euro to Syria to support the new government,
Yeah.
which is, uh, I don't know what to think about that. Yeah, it looks very naive from the Western world, but I don't know how they will give them, what conditions they will put, etc. Maybe it's even good for the minorities in Syria, so that there's more pressure on the HTS. So I'm not in the details, but I read it today and I was surprised because just few days ago we heard about the, let's say, the mass murdering of especially Alawites, but also Christians, which has a, a huge dimension. It's very difficult to know how many exactly, because the sources are, you don't know how
Yeah.
reliable they are. Nowadays it's really difficult, and the mainstream media does, or at least in the what I saw, is not that interested in this topic right now, which is very bizarre.
Well, right now the Western world is still so excited. They're drunk on the news that Bashar al-Assad has been overthrown. So they want to just ride this wave of excitement rather than asking the real question: who is replacing him? What is their ideology? What is their history? So it's not just a matter of ideology; it's a matter of demonstrated history. What they did during the Syrian civil war in Syria and also in Iraq. Jolani, the leader of this group, he was an ISIS leader. He was an
Yeah.
Al Qaeda leader. Um, so this is very important. What we at IDC are doing, what we're advocating for, you mentioned Europe gave nearly $6 billion to the Syrian transitional government. What we're advocating for in the United States is, over the last several years, when the United States government has imposed sanctions on Syria, it was not the Syrian government that was suffering. Assad was still living in his mansions, driving his Ferraris and Lamborghinis. It was the Syrian people, Christians and other people, who
Yeah.
were suffering. It was normal, everyday people. So, what we're advocating for in the United States, IDC, is to provide relief of sanctions so that the people can live, the people can breathe, the people can eat, take care of their families, but keep the pressure on the new transitional government, because they need to know that we're not going to accept anything they try to pull off, right? They need to know that our eyes are watching. We are interested in their next steps. So this is what we're advocating for here in the United States.
Mhm. I heard an interview with J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States. It was just a small, just 2 minutes interview, which I heard. Of course, the interview was longer, but I heard just 2 minutes of that, where he said, regarding Syria, he said, okay, in Iraq, we have seen um, that the number of the Christians in Iraq after 2003, when US went into Iraq, it was around 2 million Christians. Today, I don't know, maybe 10% of that number we still have, but it's like it, it, the Christians are more or less gone,
Yeah.
eradicated from Iraq. And he said we have to learn from that example, and do whatever we can so that it, in Syria, will not happen the same. So
Yeah.
this was very. I was very happy to hear that
Yeah.
from the vice president of the US, because in Europe, I didn't hear that from any politicians
Yeah.
so specifically. So this gives me hope. Do you share this hope, and what can we expect from the US government in this regard?
Yeah, I share your optimism, because one thing I can say, and let me first say, IDC is not a political organization. We're not
Yeah.
Republican. We're not Democrat. We're advocates, right? But one thing I can say is that what we saw from the Biden administration was very disappointing. What we're seeing thus far, and it's very early still, but what we're seeing thus far from the Trump administration is a lot more encouraging. Um, we're seeing, as you mentioned, Vice President J.D. Vance making a strong statement in support and in concern for Christians of the Middle East, particularly in Syria in this case. Also, in recent days, we've seen Secretary of State Marco Rubio make a very
Mm,
strong statement uh, uh, expressing his concern for Christians in the Middle East. And President Trump has always cared, even during the first Trump administration, he's made Christians in the Middle East and religious freedom a foreign policy priority. Um, President Trump is a manager, he's a leader, he rallies his own team of experts, but he himself is not an expert. JD
Mm.
Vance is a strong Christian. Marco Rubio not only is a strong Christian, but he's a foreign policy expert. And to hear these people speaking in such terms is very encouraging because President Trump understands that he is not an expert, and he is certainly not too proud to rely on his experts like Marco Rubio and JD Vance. So we're very encouraged by this. We are making efforts to advocate among the administration, Secretary of State Rubio and the Vice President as well. But we know they're on our side, so it's a matter of leveraging them and using them to win the support of other members of the administration, including the president. So I share your optimism.
Okay, I'm looking. I'm very curious what the US will do because, to be frankly, I think US is the power who has much more influence than all European countries combined. Even Syria is much closer geographically to Europe, but still,
Mhm.
what the US is doing or saying has much more influence than what Europe is doing and saying. Uh,
And
So
we
this
hope
is
we have a positive influence here in the United States because the United States has a history of having, let's say, good intentions, but sometimes those good intentions lead to negative outcomes. In the case of Iraq, for example.
yeah.
So in this case, it's a matter of managing the response, not just responding, in a reactive way, but managing the response and doing it in a wise and planned out way. I don't think President Trump is going to physically go into Syria, which I think is good, but I think he's going to rely on diplomatic means, economic means, and we hope that has effective outcomes.
Okay. Perfect. Let's go maybe to Iraq. Yeah.
Yeah.
In Iraq, we see some, at least in North Iraq, in the Kurdistan region, let's say in Kurdish region, we say some promising developments. You had in your podcast, you had like the Mr. What was his name? From Ano Abdul Masih Abduka, right? As a guest, and you had also from the Syriac Cultural Organization, Mr. Kaldo Ramzi. Uh, I heard your podcast. It was very encouraging to see that they are very active within the society, and they have a voice within the society, and they have also own educational system, etc. How do you see the situation in North Iraq right now, or in Iraq in general, but especially in North Iraq?
In Iraq in general, it's a very grim situation, as you mentioned a moment ago, Andros. The numbers have gone down from uh, 1.5 to 2 million
Yeah.
20 years ago, let's say, down to less than 150,000 by many estimates. Again, we don't have census, we don't have numbers, but about 150,000. So it doesn't look good. It's a very grim situation. However, in the north, in the KRG region, the Kurdistan Regional Government, um, things are looking a little bit more stable. Whether or not the future looks bright is a different conversation, but it looks stable. The KRG has provided a number of things for our people. One is, as you mentioned, Ano Abdoka. He is a minister in the KRG government. He's the Minister of Transportation and Communication. So he's a Christian in the central government, or excuse me, in the KRG government. But also the KRG has provided the Christians with what is known as it's just below the ministry level. It's a directorate. It's the Directorate of Syriac Heritage and Culture. We have
Mm.
our own museum, a museum of Syriac culture and heritage in Ankawa. So these signals, these developments are very encouraging. The fact that we have some kind of stability and we have a government that is helping us, working with us on our side. You have many critics from within our people, both Iraq and
Yeah.
in the diaspora, saying that the KRG has bad intentions, and they cite many examples of this. And I don't deny that those exist, but we must step back and look at we have an example in English, a saying, um, step back and look at the whole forest and don't focus on a single tree, because you'll miss the whole forest.
Yeah.
In this case, it's the same thing. So I do see some encouraging signals happening in northern Iraq for our people. Yes.
Okay. Do you see also some kind of self-governant province or something in the North Iraq, that this could be also an option?
It's always an option, certainly, but one must look at the political reality currently, and then
Yeah.
once you look at the current political reality, then we must assess, okay, what would be required in order to make that realistic and a reality. Right now, the Ninwa Plain, which is oftentimes used as the location for the autonomous region, the Ninwa Plain right now is occupied by Iranian militias, Hishd Shabi and other Iranian proxies. Um, Even you may have heard, or if not, I'll let you know, there is a so-called Christian party. It's not. It doesn't represent Christians, but it's led by a Christian person, by Rayan al-Kildani.
Mhm.
He heads up what's known as the Babylon Brigade, which is a militia, a supposedly
Okay.
Chaldean militia, but it's not. It's actually sponsored by Iran. It's armed by
Okay.
Iran. It's trained by Iran, and it's used by Iran for its political objectives in
Okay.
northern Iraq. It's a Christian party. It's a Christian militia in name only, but it's really an Iranian militia. This
And the
party,
members
the
are
Babylon.
also Shia then.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay.
This Iranian party that calls itself a Christian party, it's called the Babylon Movement. The Babylon Brigade is the militia. The Babylon Movement has taken um, parliamentary seats that are given to Christians. They're reserved specifically for Christians. It's a Christian quota in Parliament.
Mhm.
Um, they take these seats and they say, "Okay, we are Christians, we are here," but really they're Iranian puppets, unfortunately. And so this is the reality on the ground in the Ninwa Plain right now. You have Iranian militias, and then you have Christian militias who serve Iran. So any autonomous attempt will be quickly squashed by Iran and taken over as an Iranian movement. I mean, they're already there they have semi autonomy there already. The Iranians. That's the grim reality. Since the ISIS genocide, when all of the
Yeah.
Christians, Syriac, Assyrian Chaldeans, left the Ninwa Plain and they found safety in Ankawa and Erbil. 10 years later, here we are in 2025, they still haven't returned. A vast majority are still in Ankawa. They are not in the Ninwa Plain for this reason alone. When you go to the Ninwa Plain, you see banners all over the street and signs of the Iranian Ayatollah. And this is a
Okay.
sad reality, and this is something that IDC is also um, making the West aware of as well.
Okay. Thank you very much for your work. Um, I would say let's go to the diaspora, but before and after that, we can see what our audience has for questions. Uh, so, what should, from your perspective, be the role of the diaspora? What do we have to do? What would be the ideal situation from your perspective? What steps do we have to do here in the diaspora?
Yeah. Well, I think in order to be intentional on how we operate as diaspora, back to this idea of intentionality, what we need to do in the diaspora is understand ourselves, see ourselves as, if not right now, currently exclusively diaspora community. We need to understand that very soon, one day, we will be an exclusively diaspora community. And then we need to operate and plan and execute as a diaspora community. And that is to operate um, um, not reactively, but instead intentionally. We must put focus on, of course, education. Our people
Yeah,
are indeed focused on education. This is one positive thing that I can say about our community here in the United States. We need not just doctors, although yes, we need doctors, but we need journalists. We
yeah,
need lawyers. We need politicians. We need people who can tell our story, because one thing about any community, certainly a stateless community, if we don't write our own story, somebody else will. If we don't write our own story, somebody else will write it for us. I can see a foreign doctor for medical care. I can go to a foreign engineer to build up my building. I can go to a foreign um, architect to design a bridge. But to tell my story, I need journalists, I need lawyers, I need politicians. So this is what we need to focus on here in the West.
Okay, that's a very good point. I would say maybe the word vision is too big, but we as a people also need uh, a goal where we are heading, which is unifying us.
Yes.
If we take the US as an example, what is unifying the Americans? It's more or less the American dream.
Yeah.
The heritage of the Americans is diverse as it can be, but there's an American dream which is unifying the Americans so that they have one identity. Uh, What is the goal of our people? What should be the goal of our people, especially the goal of our diaspora people? If I take, for example, your podcast with George Kiraz, and there was a Maronite bishop and an Armenian expert. I forgot their name. Sorry, I think the Armenian, his name was Aram, and I forgot the name of the bishop.
Yep.
At the end, you have a question. You ask, um, um, w- what you ask, what's your hope for the future, right? That's one question you ask at
If
the
I
end.
remember correctly, it was a long time ago,
Yeah,
but I believe that was
yeah,
the question. Yes.
yeah.
So
And
I think a
uh,
lot goes into that. I think a
yeah,
lot
and
goes into.
and all three of them, or at least the George Kiraz and also the bishop said to preserve our culture.
Mhm,
I think, and I studied economy.
mhm.
I learned very in the very early stage, if a company is um, not growing, it's falling back.
Yep.
So you have to grow always. And I think this is true also for society. So we cannot, if our goal is preserving, it means we will fall back. We will decrease, everything will go down. So the goal has to be forward.
Yep.
We have to do steps forward. So only preserving is,
Yep.
from my perspective, it's not encouraging, it's not a
Yep.
motivating goal at all. It's it's uh it's just prolonging the the prolonging the assimilation, the total
Yep.
assimilation of our people. It's just a prolonging the time. Let's live as a community 100
Yep.
years more. Yeah, but
Yeah.
this is not a motivational aspect at all. So what would you?
Yep.
That's my perspective. What would you say? What should be the goal? What is the goal? What is the vision? The dream, which would
Yep.
motivate our people, or especially in
Yeah.
the diaspora? Because in the
It's a beautiful
diaspora,
question.
we are. If you take an individual level,
Mhm.
we can live a very comfortable life in the West,
Yep.
and to do non-profit work um, uh, voluntarily for our people, that so our community can survive and thrive. uh, you have to go out of your comfort zone, right?
Yep.
What can motivate our people to go out of their comfort zone, because we are living right now in a very individualistic
Yep.
era, let's say, in the
Yep.
Western world. Everybody is just focused on the individual, on the individual happiness, etc.
Yep.
And to bring the people out of their comfort zone and
Yep.
to serve their own people, it's really serving the people, then our nation.
Yep.
What goal, what vision do we have to have to
Yeah. I
motivate
think
people?
I think in order to motivate our people for the future, we need to understand and cultivate, because we don't have a clear origin story. Now, an origin story is very important because if you look at any successful people, whether it's Armenians or Americans or the British, they have a strong and very clearly defined origin story. Even if you watch movies in the movies, superheroes all have origin story. How did they get their superpower? How did they come to be? How did they get to where they are today? If you look at the American story, you mentioned the American dream. America, as you said, is a very diverse nation, a very diverse people. But what holds us together is American principles, right? It's self-determination. It's the American dream. It's Lockean philosophy, individualism, striving, growth, and that sort of thing. We don't have, as a Syriac people, we don't have an origin story that is so clear that anybody could say it in like 30 seconds or less. What we need to do is cultivate one, leverage one, because we have such a history that if we can put together such an origin story, it would provide a greater sense of who we are and where we are headed, so that it goes from the individual to the collective as a community. For example, what I mean by this is we talk a lot about all the trials and the difficulties that we face throughout history, but instead of using that only as negative, we must say despite our history, despite our painful and damaging history, we are survivors. We are resilient. We educated the world. We established the first universities. We gave the Arabs, the knowledge that they were able to build on. We brought the West. We brought Europe out of the Dark Ages, which is a fact, because it was the school of Sabine, the first university in Sabine, that
Yeah.
brought Europe out of the dark ages. If you look at history, so we need to leverage these things. It's our resilience, it's our survivability through these trials, and say this is who we are. This is what makes us who we are, and so that will give us that sense of pride to continue into the future. Because without an origin story, I think there really is no future. As you said, we could preserve what we have, but if you put your money in the bank, you'll preserve your money, but it's going to depreciate in this
Right.
inflation economy.
Yeah.
So in this situation we're in, so yes, it's about growth. It's about individual growth, but also understanding that we are part of a collective, and that matters just as much.
Very good point, and I agree for sure. You need a story for the origin where you can take pride of. But what is the picture to the future? What picture do we have for the future? How would you draw the picture for the future to
I have
generate
to be honest with
motivation?
you.
I understand having
Yeah,
pride is
yeah,
the base to where you stand on, but where are you going? To which direction
yeah.
are we going? What picture would you draw?
When I was watching your podcast interview with Joseph Bethuro a few weeks ago, um, I really admire Joseph Bethura. I've watched him. I followed him for many years. And what he said in the conversation with you on the podcast was very sobering and very sad. But it's unfortunately what I understand to be the reality is that if we remain on this trajectory, if we remain on this course, then the future does not look very promising. Um, so this is something to be uh, s- to be woken up by. We have to use this to wake ourselves up, but we can't use it to tell ourselves that this is hopeless. Um, we have to use this as motivation, as a wake up call, as leverage to say we are capable of better. We can not just preserve but grow who we are, preserve and cause our history, our heritage to flourish. But if we remain on this current trajectory, our language doesn't have a future. Our identity doesn't have a future. Even our people as individuals don't have future. Look, we've been in the United States now for over 100 years. In Europe, you've been there for 50, 60 years.
Yeah.
In 100 years in the United States, in my community here in Rhode Island, if you took all of the grandchildren and great grandchildren and great great grandchildren of the original settlers, Syriac settlers in Rhode Island, you would have several thousand, maybe tens of thousand, maybe more. Today, we have dozens. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Dozens, maybe 100. Um, And this is the grim reality because we are not a unique example. This is the example happening all across the United States,
everywhere.
Canada, and Europe. Again, you're only what 2 generations or so in the
Yeah.
European diaspora. But unless we wake up, not only will our heritage die and our language die, but even as individuals, we will no longer exist as unique entities. And I regret to
I
say this. I say this with great sadness.
I agree. We have to do something, and even in the interview with Joseph Bethuro, he said we are this generation. He referred to the I think the European community. He said we are the bridge generation. That's what he said in Syria. That we are the generation. We still know the culture of our homeland because we are the second generation, so very close to the first generation, and we also understand the culture of the countries where we are living in, and we have the
Mhm.
golden opportunity to establish something so that our children and grandchildren, etc., and upcoming generations can build on. But we have
Yeah,
to do that. Our generations, we have to do it because the first generation was not able to do it. They have to establish themselves first here
yeah,
in the new countries. We were born here or grew up here. We know the culture, we know the language, we studied at universities, etc., etc. So we have the opportunity. We
mhm,
know both worlds. We have the opportunity, and we have to do it. We have maybe 20, 30, 40 years left. If we don't use this time, it will be
yeah,
for our kids. It will be very difficult because they are very far away from from our homeland because they didn't see the first generation anymore. My kids, when
yeah,
they grew up, they will not remember their grandparents.
yeah.
That's
It's
the
very
sad
interesting.
reality.
Yeah. The example that Joseph gave for the bridge generation, their parents came, they had very limited means. With bridge generation, now this latest generation able to cultivate more, uh, to serve our people, and that's a very true example in the European context.
Mm.
And there are very many in Europe who are doing that. Joseph being one of them, the Kano team, yourself, Andros being a whole team doing the hard work and a huge benefit for our community. In the American context, what I find very interesting and very sad is the fact that it was almost the opposite. In the first generation that came to the United States, we had magazines, we had publications, we had newspapers, um, we had figures like Naum Fayek, Sanhari Bali, David Perley, who were thinkers, writers, journalists, who rallied the community. Our people served in many capacities in American society and served their people while doing so. And then the so-called bridge generation that came after them did less, and the generation after them did even less still. And eventually they disappeared. In the community here in the United States, we don't have more than 2 generations. I mean, we've been here for
Mm.
4 or 5 generations, but present, we don't have more than 2 generations. So it's been the reverse. The
I
early
understand.
generations were very productive, um, but it's lost its momentum, unfortunately.
Yeah. I don't know how far you are familiar with the Russian diaspora we have. Uh, but I at Kano we have one member. He's a
Mhm.
Russian Syrio.
Wow.
Yeah, he was born in Russia, but he got the scholarship and studied in Germany in Paderborn, where also I studied and we founded Kano. He's one more or less of the founding members of Kano. And he
Wonderful.
went back to Russia after studying, and he worked for several years in Germany. But he went back to Russia because his family is there.
Mhm,
And we made a trip in 2014,
mhm.
January 2014, 10 days to Russia, and we saw our community there. It's very
Wow.
interesting. They have a very interesting history. I didn't
Yeah.
know that before that, but just uh, um, most
Do
of
they
the
still
Russian
speak? Do they still speak Suryoyo in
They s
Russia?
they are Madenchaya, so they speak
Ah,
East Syriac,
Yep.
and some of them still speak. And so this is an interesting point. Most of them came from Hakkari or Urmia region,
Uh-huh.
Urmia region in Iran and Hakkari
Yep.
in Turkey, and
Yep.
they fled during the genocide or even before the genocide. Some of them
Hmm.
even 20 years before the genocide. So the 1880s, 1890s, the first of them. And we went to Krasnodar region and Rostov
Hmm.
a city.
Yep.
My friend, his family came from Rostov, and it was very interesting. The Syriac community there, they built a whole street, really like 1 kilometer from both sides, all houses, Syriac people, all of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
They bought a whole street. That was the first generation, and
Yeah.
the first generation, they went to I think Lenin at that time,
Hmm.
and they told him, we need a place to live. We want our own district, our own province in that time the communist region of UdSSR, right?
Hmm.
And they got something, and they established a small city. They called it Urmia. This small
Hmm.
city called Urmia is, I don't know how many inhabitants it has, but maybe around 5,000, something like that, very small, because it was on the mountains. They established a village, and this village is still there, still habited, and they have once in a year Urmia festival in that
Hmm.
village, and everybody from outside is coming there. So, so this
So it's a
Urmia village,
Russian Urmia. The Russian Urmia.
Russian Urmia, right?
Ah,
Russian
interesting.
Urmia, and
Interesting.
this Russian Urmia was, let's say, even the Assyrian Church of the East. They had an agreement with the Russian Orthodox Church that they said, okay,
Hmm.
we will not send our own bishops, our own priests, because we are like sister church.
Yeah.
Please, you will, as Christians, from a Christian faith perspective, you will take care of our people.
Hmm.
And in the communism, it was religion was forbidden anyway. Yeah, Christianity was forbidden anyway. So as a Christian, we were persecuted anyway. So they were cut off outside world for, I don't know, 80, 90 years.
Wow.
But you still have a Syriac community there. And after the fall of the UdSSR,
Hmm.
they established again a Syrian church. They talked to the patriarch, and they brought priests from Iraq, etc. And they're teaching the language, the dances, etc. from the beginning. And you have an uprising there. Even in Russia, you have an uprising. You see some singers coming, Assyrian
Uh-huh.
singers from Russia. You have
Interesting.
really good, very professional dance clubs, etc., where they dance Assyrian dances. Very interesting
That's an
history.
interesting example.
A
Yeah.
very interesting example. So the first generation, they were really forward thinking. They said,
Hmm.
okay, we need to stay together. Let's build a whole street.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, like 50 houses on the left side, 50 houses on the right side. It's like 100 families. It's like a small village in a big city.
Yeah.
So this is very helpful to preserve your heritage. Or let's
That's an
build our
interesting
own
example. I
village.
did not know about that. I didn't know. I knew we had people in Russia. I didn't know the story of the new Urmia, the Russian Urmia, and that history. That's fascinating. What a wonderful example.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and
Yeah.
hopefully, if Russia, the situation Russia and Ukraine will be better, you should go
Mhm.
there once. If you go there, I can give you some contacts, and they're very welcoming.
I'd be very interested in that. That would be
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. You're welcome. Okay, let's see what questions we got from. Or maybe before I go to the questions of the audience, another question regarding the current administration of the US. We,
Yeah.
from our perspective, let's say outside perspective, we see there's like Alina Haba, which is Chaldean, right? Uh,
Yes,
uh, she has a, I would say, pretty influential role right now in the administration. You have Masoud Boulos. Uh, he's Maronite, as far as I
mhm.
know. Also with a
He's
advisory role.
he's so he's Lebanese Greek Orthodox, Rum Orthodox. Yep,
Oh, okay. Room
yep,
Orthodox. Okay, but
yep.
Syriac in a in a broader
Certainly,
way.
certainly.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Okay. And he's the father-in-law of Tiffany Trump, right?
that's correct. Yes.
Um, how do you see that? Will it have a positive impact on the current administration? I don't know both people a lot. I heard some interviews of Masoud Boulos and also with Alina Haber.
Yeah.
At least Masoud Boulos, I would say, seems to be very influential in the Arab community, especially in, let's say, in the Christian Lebanese community, and he knows this region pretty good, I would say. It seems like that. Will it have a positive impact? And do you, as person, have contacts also to Alina Haber or Masud Boulos?
Thank you. This is a great question, actually, and this is a very important area to focus on. So, I'll first point out that neither Mr. Boulos or Alina Haba have an official capacity or official position in the administration, but nonetheless, they are definitely influential because of their personal relationships with President Trump. Alina is his personal attorney. She's not an attorney in the administration, but a personal attorney nonetheless. And Mr. Boulos, Masad Boulos, is the father-in-law of Tiffany Trump. Um, Speaking of Masad Boulos, he is very familiar with the Middle East as well as the issues affecting Christians in the Middle East. So that's a very good thing. Um, so I do think that he could have influence over some extent policy in the Trump administration, if nothing else, just providing perspective and his sort of native and organic influence on the president. Elena Heba is an interesting case because she is very close to the president, but in our observation and analysis, she is a little bit further removed from our issues than we would hope. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just a challenge for us to maybe try to change that and try to reach out to her and change that. It seems like she is more focused on the president. Of course, she's a member of the president's legal team, but in terms of her connection to the Middle East, certainly as a Chaldean, she tries to downplay that. She was on the Patrick Bet David podcast. You
Yeah,
may be familiar with that podcast. And Patrick Bet David, as you know, he's a Syrian Madan Chaya from, I believe his family's from Urmia originally. So he told Alina Haba, you're a Syrian, right? And she said, "No, I'm Arab Christian," which is disappointing to hear. Very disappointing to hear her say this. Now there are many things that go into that. Of course, she maybe wants to come across as more politically appealing, uh, or whatever the reason was. But that's some reason for concern. But hopefully that'll change, and hopefully we can make contact. We haven't had contact with her just yet, but it's something that we can certainly make an outreach attempt with regard to that.
yeah. It would be great. I think it's a opportunity we have right
Yeah,
now, that we have these two people who at least have a
yeah,
link to the Syriac nation.
yeah.
Uh, it should be very helpful. I hope so. And
With regard to
regarding
Mr.
the, sorry,
Regard to Mr. Sorry to interrupt you. With regard to Masad Boulos,
yeah,
we were recently in D.C. with His Holiness Patriarch Ephraim II, and um, we were at a meeting. In fact, we just met him at an event. We didn't have an official meeting. We saw Mr. Boulos at a meeting, and he expressed great interest in meeting with our patriarch of the Syriac Orthodox Church.
yeah.
So hopefully soon we'd be able to coordinate such a thing, because he has expressed his interest with great fervor and with great interest. So we hope to develop that.
I hope so. I wish you the best in this case. Regarding the Arab Christian topic, you had a very interesting interview with Professor Frank Salame, I think was his name.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it
Yes.
was really, really interesting. So, for our audience, if you want to dig deeper in this topic, please go to the IDC YouTube channel. You'll find very interesting podcasts, mostly with Richard, but also with your colleagues. I can really recommend that. I watched,
Thank you.
of course, some of the podcasts in preparation of this interview, but also because I'm very interested in these topics, of course.
Thank you. Thank you.
I will go to the questions. We have here, I think, 4 or 5 questions.
Sure.
Um, so I will just read them. The first one says, uh, "Hi, in view of the new situation for the Assyrian Christians in the Nineveh plain in northern Iraq, where they have to protect the Nineveh plain with their own security forces, could this be the beginning of autonomy and thus the prophecy of Isaiah 19:23 to 25 come true?" So I think more or less I asked this question. Of course, I didn't know about the prophecy. I need to look it up, what the prophecy is saying. But yeah, maybe you want to answer to this question.
Yeah, I think we discussed it, and I think the answer is yes. That's a wonderful aspiration. It's an important aspiration, but we must look at the reality on the ground and then ask ourselves, given the reality on the ground, what steps would need to happen? What political realities would need to manifest in order to make it possible? As of right now, the Nineveh Plain is a contentious area. Christians have not returned. Assyrian, Syriac, Chaldean Christians have not returned to the Nineveh Plain, unfortunately. They remain in Erbil because the Nineveh Plain right now is basically occupied by Iranian proxies, which makes it
Mm.
incredibly dangerous for Christians to return. So hopefully, one day in the near future, they'd be able to return, and whatever the political reality at that time is, if they were able to govern themselves and look after their own interests, that is something that would be a wonderful outcome.
Mm. Perfect. Thank you. The second question is, how do you assess the first Trump administration's policies regarding the protection of Christian minorities in the Middle East? And what do you think about the second term?
Yeah, I think the first Trump administration uh, set the standard. He made it a policy priority to support Christians in the Middle East, as well as religious minorities in general, religious freedom in the Middle East. He made it a foreign policy priority of his. Of course, he was very limited in what he could do in the first administration, simply because one, he was new. He didn't really have solid footing as a politician in Washington D.C. Number one. Number two, he didn't have Congress entirely on his side like he does now. In the second administration, I have great hopes that he'd be able to serve the interests of Christians and other minorities in the Middle East. As we mentioned, very high-ranking members of his administration, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, have made public statements in strong support. So we're very hopeful, and we stand by ready to work with them in any way we can.
Perfect. Thank you. The third question is it possible for us to preserve who we are and can our people survive without returning to our homeland? How can we reclaim our home or at least our rights there when we are not there?
This is a very important question. I really appreciate the person who asked this question. They're thinking in the right place
Mm.
because, as we said before, we need to start operating and managing ourselves with the understanding that we are now or soon will be an exclusively but diaspora community. So we have no choice but to preserve what we have and to grow what we have here in the diaspora outside of the homeland. Um, so it's very important. I do think it's possible. We look at examples like the Jews. The Jews lived in a diaspora for several centuries. The Armenians have lived in a diaspora for about the same time as we have, about 100 years, but they've been very successful in doing so. They have a very strong sense of who they are, what their history is, and what their heritage is, and that, of course, informs where they're headed in the future. So, if we look at examples such as these, and of course look internally, uh, again, with intentionality and with reflective hindsight, I think it's very possible.
Thank you. Uh, sorry. For the fourth question is, what is your view on our lacking attitude to return? Shouldn't this be our goal? Shouldn't our goal be what we can achieve in the future rather than focusing on the origin story?
I think returning home is something that should be applauded for anybody who wishes to return home. Um, our homeland, of course, holds a very important spot for us symbolically, historically, as well as in terms of our reality. We have a direct connection, not more than a generation or two, to our homeland. So that's very, very important. But we must ask ourselves, while we while many of us are returning to the homeland, which is very important and should be supported, we must also focus on the diaspora as well, because the reality is more of us will remain in the diaspora. And if there is any chance of survival of our heritage, of our language, of our identity, the majority of it, or the gravity of it, will have to be, like it or not, will have to be in the diaspora. So while the homeland is important, and I encourage whoever wishes to go back to please, of course, do so. The diaspora is the center of gravity and will likely remain the center of gravity. So if we don't take advantage of that, then we wouldn't have a future.
Have you been in Tur Abdin?
I regret to say that I have not, but I dream. I
Okay.
dream one day of visiting. I've been to Syria. I've been to Lebanon. I've been to Jerusalem, but Tor Abdin is someplace that I have not yet been to. Um, but one day, hopefully, very soon, I wish to visit the very important landmarks of ours, where my family comes from, and all of the villages, not just my own.
You see, the reason why I'm asking is you see in the last, let's say, 20 years, a movement back to Tur Abdin. I would not say moving back to Tur Abdin because there are very few people moving back to Tur Abdin. We have some families, maybe 10, maybe 20 families. I don't know the exact numbers, maybe 30 families who moved back
Yeah.
from Germany or Switzerland or other countries, moved back
Mhm.
to Tur Abdin. But my point is, from year to year, the Syriac community is going more and more to vacation to Tur Abdin, building vacation houses in Tur Abdin,
Yep. Yep.
securing their properties
Mhm.
um, in this way, and we see more and more um, guiding tours for Syriac communities from Europe, especially from Europe, going to
Mhm.
Tur Abdin. You have every year maybe 10 or 20
Yeah.
groups who go to Tur Abdin, and I think I heard a lot of stories, especially of young people who were really not that connected to our heritage and to our people. But when they did this tour, this journey, it was a life-changing experience. And the same you hear, let's say, from the Gishru organization, which is
Mhm.
based, I think, in Chicago, and in I think in Chicago, if I'm not wrong. They are doing always trips to the Nineveh Plains. And if you hear the stories of the members
Mhm.
participants, a lot of people say that's a life-changing experience, and I feel much more attached to my history and to my people than before. Uh, could this also be a part, let's say, an important part for our diaspora to say, okay, let's build at least a holiday village, yeah,
Yeah.
to do general to do regularly our holidays in
Mhm.
somewhere in the homeland, if it's Iraq or if it's Tur Abdin or if it's Syria or Lebanon, um, where we can at least have holiday in
Mhm.
an area where still we our culture is preserved or lived, not only preserved, but our culture is developed, and that
Mhm.
where they live our culture. And it's also wrong to say to preserve our culture, because the culture in Germany 100 years ago and today it's totally different. So
Right.
every nation is developing. So
Yeah.
we have to develop. And if we go to Tur Abdin, unfortunately, there's not a lot of Syria left in Tur Abdin who living there, so they don't have really the means to develop our culture. But at least they're not staying still; they are moving.
I agree. I agree. That would be wonderful. I mean, a trip there should be the goal of every young person born in the diaspora, because, as you said, it will provide that connection. If it's not a connection they felt already, it may provide that spark, um, and a reminder of who they are and what they need to work for to preserve. I agree. Yeah.
Okay. Uh, maybe one idea. Did you ever think about to start an IDC branch in Europe?
I think that would be wonderful. I think that would be wonderful. I would love to talk to whoever is out there that would be interested, whether it's Kano, whether it's any organization. I think it's. In fact, I just recently had the pleasure of meeting a friend, Yusuf Aydin, who is a member of Swedish Parliament. He was
Of course,
just
I
here in the
know him.
United States. He was here in the United States to speak on behalf of course, Christians in the Middle East as a member of Swedish Parliament. He's also been appointed by his Christian Democratic Party as the envoy, the representative of Christians in the Middle East. So with examples like that, with examples like Yusuf and Kano organization, and many others, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to create that bridge, to bring the IDC model to Europe, to work within European governments as well as the EU Parliament itself.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk maybe offline about this topic. I think it would be
Yeah,
very interesting to
yeah,
bring the IDC idea to Europe, because
yeah.
Europe, of course, is also very influential and very
Mhm.
important for our diaspora community, I would say.
Yeah.
Richard, thank you very much for your time. I will complete this session with which one a question which where the answer should be, if possible, one sentence.
Okay.
So if you could be the voice of all persecuted Christians, and especially of the Christians in the Middle East, and everybody would, the whole world would listen to you, what would you say?
Honor them as people, honor them as a community, and honor them as a heritage that not just they benefit from, but the whole world benefits from. I know this is more than one sentence, but I must say the heritage of Christians in the Middle East is not just to the benefit of the Christians of the Middle East, it's Christians around the world. Because it's the Christianity that came from the Middle East, specifically Syriac Christianity, that informs Western Christianity of the mind of Christ, the mind frame, the worldview, the cultural background of early Christianity. So if Christianity disappears in the Middle East, it will disappear also around the world in its original form. That's all I'd have to say.
Thank you. There's nothing I can add. Richard, was an honor. I could go on and on and on and continue for several hours, but I think we it should be enough for today. And hopefully, we have an interview in person in your future if you are in Europe, or maybe if I come, or some other members of Kano to US. It would be great to have also an interview in person with you.
I would love that. You're welcome anytime. It's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. So thank you so much for what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. And have a nice evening for all the audience and to you, and especially to our audience. I hope you like this. And as I said at the beginning, if you have some more questions, or you listen to this podcast on a later stage, just write your questions down and we will try to answer. And I'm pretty sure Richard will also take a look to the comments, and he will also answer your questions as good as possible. And we hope that you would subscribe and continue to support us, and have a good night. Brich Ramsho or Brich Tahro to our audience in the US.
تودي ساقي بدي خمشو. فيش بشلومه.
Howdy, Eloch.